These are the unwritten rules of Mexico, part 2. The first unwritten rule of Mexico is to not use too big of a bill when paying cash. For example, if buying something for less than 50 pesos, try not to use a 200 peso bill. If buying something for less than 100 pesos, try not to use a 500 peso bill. Now, if this is all you have, that's not to say you can't make the purchase, but be really apologetic, like, una disculpa, solo tengo un billete de 500, no tendrás cambio? And then it's probably going to be okay if they have change, but try not to make a habit of it because it is considered rude to use too big of a bill when paying cash. There are 3 things that every Mexican must have in the refrigerator. Number 1, cerveza. Number 2, homemade salsa. And number 3, tortillas. You must have those 3 things in your refrigerator to be a legitimate Mexican. And what you must absolutely not do is use bottled salsa. Now, this bottled salsa, it has 2 legitimate uses. Number 1, you can put this on popcorn, or better yet, it can occupy space in the trash can. The next unwritten rule of Mexico is that if you're over at someone's house and they offer you a drink, you say no. If they offer you a drink a second time, you say no. Finally, if they offer you a drink a third time, you can say yes. I had been living in Mexico a long time without hearing about this refusing a drink thing, but recently someone left a comment on the channel saying something to this extent that you should refuse twice and only accept on the third time. And I asked I'm like, this isn't true, is it? Like, this sounds so crazy to me that you have to refuse twice and then accept on the third time. And she's like, no, I agree with that. It feels rude to me to accept that on the first time. Unless I'm like at my parents' house or something, then I can accept a drink. But yeah, if I'm at someone's house who I'm not super close with, well then, yeah, I feel like I should refuse a couple of times. Even if it's like a good family friend's house, I feel like I should refuse a couple of times before I finally say yes. So this was a total shock to me, but it's something you should consider when you're in Mexico. The next unwritten rule of Mexico is that when you enter someone else's home, you leave your shoes on the whole time you're in their house. The next unwritten rule of Mexico is that shorts should only be worn by kids, at the beach, or on Sundays. Aside from that, pants should be worn pretty much everywhere. It's not that you can't wear shorts in Mexican cities. However, if you do, people will know immediately that you're not from there. Another unwritten rule of Mexico is that if you're in somebody's presence, like let's say you're having a conversation with them and you want to leave, you would say con permiso or excuse me, and then they would say back to you propio. Another situation in which you would say con permiso is actually something that happened to me yesterday, and I screwed up and I did not say con permiso, but I was in a store and I was walking past someone and there was enough space for me to get by, but there wasn't a lot of space. So since I didn't need the person to move, I didn't say anything, but I should have. So I walked past the guy and he turns to me and in English he says in a snarky tone of voice, "Oh, I'm sorry." Now, I think his response was kind of rude, but I should have said, in that case, con permiso, as I was walking by, even though I could get by without him moving. Another unwritten rule of Mexico is that you never put your purse or your bag on the floor. There's a superstition here that it's really bad to put that on the floor, so it's looked at super weird. Like let's say you're going out to a restaurant, you would always put your purse on a chair or on a bag hook or something like that. And if you're at a nicer restaurant and you want them to bring one of those purse stands over for you, you can ask them for a perchero. If you're enjoying this video, do me a favor and poke that like button. In Mexico, if you employ a housekeeper, a nanny, or some other kind of help, it is considered a huge cultural faux pas to socialize in public with that person. Like, you cannot invite that person out for dinner and go have a meal with them in public. That is looked at super weird and is not culturally acceptable at all. And on this topic, if you're at somebody else's house who employs help, it is totally unacceptable to strike up a conversation with that person. You can ask them for a glass of water or a cup of coffee, where you should put your coat, where the nearest bathroom is. Questions like that are totally fine. But to strike up a conversation with this person, ask them where they're from, how long they've been living here in this city, if they have kids, things like that, is totally unacceptable here in Mexico. When you're shopping in the US, when you're done and you're out in the parking lot, you put your shopping cart in one of those cart corrals. However, here in Mexico, those cart corrals don't really exist, and the grocery stores and the big box stores will usually have people in the parking lot helping with the carts. And one of these people will come and take your cart from you, or if you leave it out there, well then typically one of them will come get it pretty quickly. And these people who are in the parking lot taking your shopping cart will also generally help you back out of your parking spot. Like they'll stop traffic and wave you back, and it's typically appropriate to give them a small tip between like 2 and 5 pesos. I always tip these people when they're being helpful. However, some of them are purposefully an annoyance. Like they'll stand directly behind your car so you can't back out, and then they'll wave you back like pretending like they're helping, but really they're impeding your ability to back out. So when they're annoying like that, I don't tip them, but when they actually help me, yes, I'll throw them a small tip every time. In various stores around Mexico, there will also be people out front who will be offering to assist you to your car. If you accept their help, they'll push your cart to your vehicle and then load all your purchases up into your car. And in that case, generally a higher tip is warranted because they did a lot more work than simply taking your cart away or helping you back out of your parking spot. And on the topic of tipping, it is not customary to tip taxis or to tip for street food. But if you're going to a sit-down restaurant throughout Mexico, about 10% of the total bill is a pretty standard tip for good service and 15% for great service. I usually try to tip well without forcing my culture on a different country. So to do this, I generally tip 15% at most places because 15% is still within the culturally expected limits of tipping without doing too much where you're trying to change the culture. So like, if the service is decent or better, I'll tip 15%. If the service was bad, typically 10%. And if the service was horrible, either pocket change or nothing. But if you're dining at a really cheap place like a fonda or Cocina Económica, generally these places where they have plastic chairs instead of regular restaurant chairs, sometimes you're even sharing a table with other people dining there. Well, in those cases, tip a minimum of 10 pesos no matter how cheap the meal was. Another unwritten rule of Mexico is that there are a lot of people here in this country who view it as rude to say no to somebody. So you'll find yourself in a lot of situations when you're living here where you'll receive an answer to a request or a question that feels a little bit off or feels a little bit weird. Now, if you ever have that feeling that it just doesn't feel right, well, that's a good chance that that was that person's way of saying no to you without actually saying no. It was their way of responding to you in what they consider a polite way. For example, instead of someone telling you no, they might say their agenda is full, or instead of someone saying, no, sorry, I can't today, they might say, today is complicated. So it's these little ways of answering the question without saying no that you'll experience quite often. Or also, there have been a number of times that I've asked for directions in Mexico, and a few of those times I've been given completely incorrect directions. Now, I think these are typically examples of a time when someone doesn't know the answer, but they don't want to tell me no, so then they just say something instead. If you want to see more unwritten rules of Mexico, watch part 1 of this video right here.